people out of, or at least at risk for losing their jobs. No, wait a minute. AI is going to create as many jobs as it displaces. No. 800 million. See, 800 million jobs are going to go away. No. This was just yesterday. It's going to be the greatest jobs so we got this seesaw, and it's only because we keep focusing on the task and the tasks that we can see, that we think are going to be automated or could be automated. So instead of just getting stuck on this roller coaster, oh, this is a great message, by the way. This was on my way to the airport. This is a great automating human tasks, and then all the work goes away. Now, wait a minute. Why not say instead, let's take all this innovation, let's focus it elsewhere. So the worry, by the way, is that we're going to have all this smart software that's going to put people out of jobs. This is a great quote by Pedro Dominguez. People worry computers will get too smart, take over the world. The real problem is they're already too stupid, and they've already taken over the world. So we all have these digital distraction devices that are, basically defining how we spend our time. And so the truth is, all this innovation is going in to try to automate human tasks, and we have this picture because we're all smart and we know about technology, and we see all these new technologies coming in, and we can't picture what that work of the future is going to be. Well, there's one of the reasons for that is that we're focusing on innovating in the wrong place. I talked about people's superpowers. Why are we spending all this time on the negative side of the ledger of all the things that we can do to help people not have to do those specific tasks? Well, certainly, there's plenty of tasks that are boring and repetitive. We don't want people to do those. But we can focus a huge amount of our innovation in helping people to understand their superpowers, to develop their superpowers, to amplify their superpowers. I think discussion just before was about using Excel. How many people here can actually do a pivot table by hand? I mean, that's a superpower. Right? It's an incredible superpower. That's why we have that's why we have Excel. And so this is where we can focus a significant amount of our automation as we automate, as we become more and more digital. So we talked about skill set, we talked about mindset. Now let's talk about practices. And I want to leave you with 3 practices that I think every organization, if they want to become exponential, has to at least have an opinion about, a set of processes to address. And then we'll bring up our amazing panelists, and we can talk about some of the specific strategies about helping within your organizations and within your different populations. So I want to talk about strategies for individuals, for teams, and for organizations. So for individuals, to be exponential, you have to know your own skills and capabilities. You have to know what your own superpowers are. If the only reason you do that is because this is where robots and software are going. These repetitive tasks that none of us really like to do, that's what robots and software are taking over. And so we have to move to that upper right quadrant. That's how we're going to continue to have human-centric work, which I argue is the deliverable. This is all about helping people to achieve their human potential. That's what all the automation work that we're doing is all about, is helping people to stay at the center of the calculus. But you have to understand your own skills, and I don't care how you do that, whether you go to eParachute or you use Strengths Finders or whatever model you have within your organization of skills and capabilities, every single person has to understand their own exponential abilities, has to be able to know what their superpowers are. Next, I want you to collaborate exponentially. I want you to think about how teams become groups of problem solvers. Like in Marvel movies, when there's a door that needs to be knocked out, oh, we need the Hulk to do that, and then something needs to be cut in half, oh, that's the laser with Iron Man. I mean, your team, each member has superpowers. Do they know what they are? Do they know how they work with others? Are they applying them to the right problems? That is your challenge as a leader. If you want a great model to just look at and reflect on, look at Valve Software. One of the most successful video game companies in the world. No managers, 0 managers. You come into this organization, you're hired for your profile of being a problem solver, but you don't have a title and you don't have a role. You find your role, you float around, you dynamically bind around the problems that you are best optimized to solve. And Valve actually put its entire employee handbook online, you can read it, and you'll notice this is their org charts. No org, no hierarchy. It's just a network. Third, align exponentially. So Talked about strategies for individuals, strategies for teams, now for organizations. We know from our work with many of the initiatives that we've built where we help a variety of stakeholders to all come together, that the process of being exponential, the process of continually being adaptive, of continually solving new problems, at the organizational level is critical, where alignment, that is, well, here's a question for you. You want to know how aligned your organization is? You stop any employee, anybody who works in your organization in the hallway, and you say, what are the top 3 strategic goals of our organization? That's step 1. Step 2, what are your strategic goals? What is it that you are trying to accomplish in the next 4, 8, 12 months that contributes to the strategic goals of the organization? Third question, which of your strategic goals align with which of the goals of the organization? If you could ask 5 different employees and they all give great answers, you are an aligned organization. If you don't get consistent answers, that's good information to have. If people can't even answer the question, you have an alignment problem. So you want a great example of this? Read up on Asana. This is an exponential company that is collaboration software. They stop everything they do as an organization every 4 months and go through a 1-week alignment process. Everybody looks at the goals they had for the past 4 months. They call them stories. The goals they have for the next 4 months. They all agree on what they're going to do, and then they execute fearlessly for the next 4 months. Fearless alignment. To align exponentially. So strategies for individuals, strategies for teams, strategies for organizations. Now, you want more information on this, go to Singularity Hub. As a matter of fact, this is just one of the stories that I was just talking about, the growing bones that was just announced yesterday. The story is on Singularity Hub. We've got a ton of information about these processes around building exponential organizations. You go on, just Google, literally Google EXQ. You'll find, I know that many of your organizations have gone through sort of the Center for Digital Nonprofits, you've gone through that survey. Here's another survey for you to just look at some of the characteristics that we see of successful exponential organizations. Here's a way to be able to do that. I post a ton of stuff on LinkedIn, including a lot about PACE and actually programs that you can build around PACE. And then just to sum up, okay, so we talked about mindset, we talked about skill set, and we talked about superpowers, and we talked about solving the world's problems. But I realized I had the wrong title for this, the wrong title for this talk. Really, the way we need to be thinking and what we're going to be talking about on the panel is not that we all are solving the world's problems faster. It's actually that we're helping the world to solve the world's problems faster. That is, that everything I've talked about are the processes, the mentalities, and the skill set that we can actually help our populations with. And if we do that, then we won't just be the ones developing our own superpowers. The populations that we work with will as well. Thank you. Please join me. Where do you want to be? Okay, great. I'll take that end. I've done all the talking.
I'll do one. Alrighty. So, I'm Diana Langley, and I work at Oxfam, and I am the Digital Workplace Manager for Oxfam. And I have been charged to moderate this panel, to take Gary's lovely presentation and quite thought-provoking pieces out to us into a kind of place where we can actually take things from this today. When you go out into your organization, you can hear about other examples of how this is happening in other places. And I think I'm going to start with introducing our other 2 panelists. So first we have Paul Miller, and he is the CEO and founder of the Digital Workplace Group. It's Paul's first summit, so we need to be friendly to him as we are. Yeah. His latest book is The Digital Renaissance of Work, and it is shortlisted for the CMI Management Book of the Year Award. Paul's previous book, The Digital Workplace, and How Technology is Liberating Work, helped popularize and explain the word digital workplace, and for that I'm appreciative, because that's in my title. So thank you, Paul. Paul hosts various podcasts and is hosting Digital Workplace Live. He's also founded the Digital Nations Group, which so then gives Paul a special insight into government organizations here. It operates as a super stream to the broader digital workplace group. Members include the IMF and the Scottish Government and the European Commission and UNHCR. So welcome Paul to the stage with us today. And then we have Leela Toplik, and Leela actually works with NetHope, and she is a former refugee and a refugee school teacher, and leads the No Lost Generation Tech Task Force at NetHope, which is a community of 70 organizations, which are global and local NGOs, UN agencies, and private sector companies. And it was in a refugee camp in Hungary in the mid-90s that Leela had her first introduction to computers, inspiring her to study technology and work in the tech sector. So after 13 years at Adobe and at Microsoft, Leela decided to combine her personal experience as a refugee with her passion for technology and as a background in the private sector to drive collaboration. So we're very grateful to have them here, and all that to say they're incredibly qualified to talk about this, and I'm just the moderator. And thank you, Gary, for your talk.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the things that I want us to start with was this all sounds very cool, and you know, we're all on board with becoming exponential organizations, but some part of this future of work has, as with all technologies, it has the potential to not be neutral. And it could build in a lot of inequality, where some parts of our organizations develop these kinds of skills to take on the new future of work, and some parts are kind of left behind. And that's both in our organizations and potentially you know, with the constituents that we work in. And I wonder if, Leela, you could bring some comments in on that, especially with your experience and some stories to make it real for the people here.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. My second, actually, NetHope Summit. So building on something that Gary was talking about, and also Lauren yesterday, really thinking about what can we in the NGO community do to support the populations that we're serving that need our support. I'll talk about three things that I've been thinking about, both as somebody who has been a refugee, supported refugees as a teacher, and then more recently, over the past 2 years, leading a technology task force that brings together, actually most of you, humanitarian sector with the private sector, with the academic institutions to help meet those needs. There are three roles that I see for us, for the NGOs to play in ensuring that the populations, like the conflict-affected children and youth, are ready for this new world of work and learning. One is being enablers, and to be enabler, we need to really help them develop agency instead of develop dependency. And what agency really means is for a young person that is currently living in Zatre camp in Jordan to be able to become an active learner and continue upskilling and reskilling after that first boot camp that we might have implemented in the camp, and to be able to find the next job after they no longer have the opportunity to continue with the first job. The second thing is to be entrepreneurial in how we approach the problems we're solving. So we talked about problem solving, we talked about collaboration. I want to bring it back to the fact that the problems we're trying to solve together with the populations that we're supporting are really difficult, and we don't have all the answers. But if we approach those problems in an iterative and collaborative way, if we're not afraid of failure, but we actually embrace failure as a way to learn and do something better the next time, then we have a better chance together with those populations to actually solve those problems. The third thing that I'll talk about, and it's incredibly important as more people come online and as we have technology become every part of our life, and we'll talk more about AI tomorrow, but it is to first act as the protectors of the populations we're serving, but also to empower them to protect themselves in the new digital world, to protect their data, protect their privacy, and to be fully aware of how they can successfully and effectively engage in the both online and offline world. Over to you.
And then Gary, Paul, you've had some experience with this kind of thing, but could you give us an example of an organization where you think, or an entity that you've engaged in that's kind of trying those first steps in the exponential way that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, and the first thing to say is that I'm pretty overwhelmed by the experience I've had since I've been here. So I feel a little bit kind of unprepared for this audience. And I'm used to spending a lot of time with a lot of corporates and governments, but actually spending time with a group of people who really make an impact in the way that people do here has sort of moved me quite a lot. So I'll get into this by just sort of picking up on what Gary said, which is, he talked about the Industrial Revolution, and we could also talk about the time we're in as possibly like the period after the Gutenberg press. What about this? Does anybody remember the 60s? So imagine this period that we're in is like the 60s. I was going to say the 60s on steroids. So it's like the 60s on drugs. But what I mean is, it's actually the 60s without drugs. And it's actually, to me, the implementation phase of what was begun 50 years ago. I mean, I miss the 60s, but it's really an opportunity. And I think what we've heard over the time when I've been here is some stories about implementation. And the stories that we heard this morning from Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon are stories about implementation. So just to kind of pick up your question, what's an example of organizations who are thinking about the future of work? Because when I started work, there wasn't such a thing as the future of work. There was just work. And it was like the same thing again. ING, Dutch bank-based, they took the Dutch part of the global bank and they have completely restructured it in what they think of as an agile way. Yes, they've done the whole office restructuring, refreshing, changing their codes of dress, but they've actually radically restructured the hierarchy. So the hierarchy's not disappeared, but it's become much, much flatter. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an example. Another example I would say is the Singapore government. So if you're born in Singapore, you get a lifelong learning fund. So what they're saying to every citizen, albeit a small country, is we expect that you're going to go through numerous iterations of what you need to know. And so we're going to give you the funding to enable that through your life. I've got 3 daughters in their 20s, and they talk about their lives in phases of work. This is what I'll do before I have children. This is what I'll do when I have children. Then when I'm in my 50s and 60s. And so there's a new concept, really, where work has, I think, 3 sort of parts to it. One is things you do for money, things that you do where you probably earn a little bit less money, and things that you do voluntarily. And this Indian idea of dharma, of action, which is, I think, where rooted in the word work. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
It did totally answer my question, okay. But you know what, it's open for me? When you talk about things about funding for learning, all that kind of thing, I suddenly go, and who is responsible and who is accountable for making that happen? Because a whole lot of us here have got teams and we are hiring people and potentially keeping them on for longer or shorter or any of those kinds of things. Do we just go out and hire new staff and start all over again? Do we expect governments to do it? What is the role of NGOs in this kind of future of work? And maybe, Gary, if we can start with you, what is the challenge to us?
Well, so I think a couple of things that you said just sort of resonated with me. So first off, and this is not something I think that it actually is common in the NGO space, but certainly in the corporate space, that you can think of it as, I tend to overuse the Venn diagrams, but if you think of it as here's all the skills that you have in the organization and here's all the need, the demand. Organizations are constantly going through change. And so you decide, oh, these are the skills I don't need anymore. We fire those people. Oh, these are all the new skills that I need. All right, so these are truck drivers that are staring in the headlights of self-driving trucks. They're the skill sets we're probably not going to need in the future. Oh, over here, these are all the blockchain programmers. Yeah, we need a lot of those. And so there tends to be this sort of zero-sum game. And so instead, with a lifelong learning mentality, what we have as an opportunity to do is to say, well, wait a minute, what is actually the delta between the skills that we have and the skills that people need? And how can we help them to actually discover this whole process of this kinds of skills that they really want to use and understand where opportunity is? So I think this is one of the opportunities and challenges for NGOs is how can you help every single person in the organization to become this lifelong learner, to continually be a problem solver, but to know the new problems that the organization is constantly trying to solve. And you would be amazed at how adaptive and how insightful even some of the people that you would think of as not having the slightest insight or understanding of the needs of the population or the kinds of problems to be solved, those are often the people that actually can solve the problems the best. You know, Google did an analysis recently where they looked at the characteristics of the highest performing teams. You know what the two characteristics are? Psychological diversity. You look around the room and nobody looks like you, they're all different. and psychological safety. There's a tremendous range of perspectives in the room, and everybody is safe in being able to try to talk about the problem-solving ideas that they have. And so this is where I think, as NGOs, you've got a huge opportunity is to really leverage more and more of the human power within the organization to continually solve new problems.
Could I add something to that? So we talk about the lifelong learning, and one of the first barriers to even becoming a lifelong learner is actually education and learning being visible and accessible to you. So being the voice of the populations we serve and in this conversation, one of the things that we also need to be thinking about, because they are also our future peers and colleagues, how do we ensure through our programming that learning, especially because it is even more fragmented, while there is abundance of learning opportunities, it's quite fragmented and invisible to the young people who don't have mentors or guides to help them really navigate how they can connect to the learning opportunities that are right for them. So one of the projects that was mentioned in Microsoft keynote, and we'll be talking more about it at 1 p.m., is Hakim Chatbot, that is really designed to address that basic need to know where are the learning resources that are right for me. So for the youth in the Middle East and North Africa, it means learning resources in Arabic. They're free, and they also can be available offline because young people don't always have connectivity that's available to them depending on when they're trying to access the learning content. So I would also argue, as we think about lifelong learning, let's make sure that we're thinking about access and discovery as a core component, and ongoing access and discovery as a core component for lifelong learning.
And then just to piggyback on that, so one great example of the next step is then that there actually is the opportunity to have kind of the mentoring process about the things you need to learn. And so you met at the Singularity University Global Summit in August, Squirrel AI Learning. So this is an amazing company in China that in 2 years has developed 1 million customers, basically helps kids with AI that is like basically a mentor or a coach. It shows them a bunch of different videos, a couple of quizzes, learns how their minds work, and then as the kids are trying to basically solve problems in a range of different topics, and originally science, and now more and more the humanities, it's as if they have their own AI coach to be able to help them. And so that's a perfect example of where you could help a lifelong learner then to have the kind of to continue to have the kind of agency to keep on learning the next step.
Yeah, and I think one interesting thing to think about is these what I would call new style NGOs that are emerging, things like change.org, 38 Degrees, and where you're getting, and I also think what's happening with the technology sector, I mean, I look at the social philanthropy sides of people like GlaxoSmithKline or ExxonMobil, and then I compare it with the programs that Microsoft, Facebook, Google, etc. have got, and they seem to have a deeper level of mission and commitment to them. And I think so what you're getting is, in a way, the whole field itself and the organizations themselves are, there's if you like, the traditional organizations, take somebody like the World Health Organization, do fantastic work, and then you put somebody like Click, and you put their visual data onto WHO data, and it becomes so much more actionable. Mm-hmm. So the idea of lifelong learning is not just about the people inside your employee base, because I think that's probably not going to grow very much, but the network that you're tapping into. Mm-hmm. Because I think what we're actually doing, if we get back to my maybe a slightly weird 60s analogy, is we're moving from the individual to the community. We're moving from separation to connection. And we see this with our technology systems. We're trying to move from silos and fragmentation to integration. So that's the overall kind of task in front of us. Yeah.
But I'm going to push you. Who should make this happen? Who should be accountable? Do we all sit here and go, that's my program, folks? They should be thinking about this kind of empowering of other populations. Or is it the folks here? How do you actually envision that happening in our organizations now?
So I think that you can think of it as a partnership between different functions within the organization, IT and your personnel or your human resources function within your organization. You should have this commitment. You need to have lifelong learners. You need to have the kinds of processes that allow people to continually adapt and solve new problems. And then in terms of the help with the specific populations, I think that takes a network. There's no single organization that's going to be able to solve every part of this. These are, they tend to overuse the phrase wicked problems, but basically they all have the same characteristics. They're large, multidimensional. There's a lot of interlocking factors. And so when you're talking about especially really scaled populations, lots of displaced people, then you're going to have the kinds of networks that NetHope represents continually working together and optimizing their solutions and adapting their solutions on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to say no single organization, but organizations as a network have that responsibility.
To build on what Gary was saying, we've talked a little bit during the first 2 days of the summit about collective impact, and over the next 2 days we'll continue to bring to life what collective impact really looks like, including in a session later this afternoon. But it is really recognizing that there's no single sector, single organization that can solve the problems of, let's say, 68 million people displaced, and over half of whom are children in need support ranging from education all the way to livelihoods protection and participation. That said, there is a way through collective impact, and we've been doing this for the last 17 years, to activate all available resources, which includes technology, and all available expertise, which includes all of you sitting in a room. And that is inclusive of the NGOs, private sector companies, donors, governmental agencies. Everybody needs to have a seat at the table, plus the people that we are supporting, because ultimately they will become problem solvers in their communities and be enabled through this process to contribute positively in their communities. So it's not us forever. So that's one point I'm making, because it's not sustainable. There are too many crises and too many problems, and it's not one single sector doing this alone.
Yeah, I also wonder what the role of, if you're thinking about the human beings in any organization, whether they're not-for-profits or not, the power of brand and reputation. I mean, there's one technology company not represented here who, through poor publicity, is finding it harder to attract people. I would imagine that the Team Rubicon story from this morning is an attractive thing for people wanting to be in that organization and to join that organization. So I think I'm interested in thinking about what things will persist over time, and I think reputation, trust, these things are going to matter over time. And I think, so whose responsibility is it? It's the CEO's responsibility to think about, what does our organization represent? How visible is it in the world? How do we make our stories known in the world? Because I learned things about Team Rubicon, so I now want to get them on our 24-hour Round the World Digital Workplace Festival in February. A whole bunch of people will then see that story and it'll amplify. Yeah. And then probably a few people tuning into it will think, I want to work for them or be volunteers.
So that's the classic one, right? Like, how do we get out of our own way? How do we not be so in love with our processes that we actually are able to take the next step, or at least be primed to take the next step? And one of them is that you say that your own brand gets in the way. What other things do you think could get in the way of us being ready to do that?
So one that I see quite a bit, just again, given the pace of change, but also given the magnitude of the crisis and the needs that we need to support. So Middle East and North Africa, 162 million young people between the ages of 10 and 24, yet I still see so much duplication. So advocating for, again, coming together, collaborating and sharing, and really through innovation, lifting up the whole sector. So the time is now, and also the time is precious. We don't have time to duplicate. The second thing is that we haven't talked about much, but it is a barrier for refugees in many of the countries, is the policies that prevent them from accessing some of the services that they need in order to really truly develop agency. So it could be, for example, access to work. What can we do? We can advocate. We also can think about designing alternative pathways for them to access employment, whether it's remote work or impact sourcing, but there are ways to get creative and entrepreneurial in solving the challenges or the barriers that are posed to the populations. And we also could be working with the host governments to provide incentives that are inclusive of the host communities. So I talk about conflict-affected children and youth, and that's inclusive of refugees, internally displaced, and also host community youth that we need to support, because 92% of refugees are based in the places in the world, in the countries that don't have the infrastructure to support everybody who's coming in.
Yeah. I like it. And then I think, that one of the things that Gary spoke about was the advantages that we have with that heart piece. And how our people are already in here with a mission, and they like it. What other advantages do you think NGOs could have in this space already, or nonprofits? What already gets us half a step on this journey so far to the transition?
So one of the greatest advantages that each of you have, we with our work with Singularity University and beyond, we meet a tremendous number of innovators that have problems that they want to solve, but they actually don't really understand the problem as deeply as you do. They don't have the feet on the ground. They don't work with the population. They don't often have access to the population. The example I use is there's a startup in San Francisco that decided it wanted to solve supply chain and logistics challenges within Africa. And I had to just patiently watch, so Africa's not a country, right? It's a continent. And there's lots of markets within that continent, and you have tremendous reach and access and deep understanding of the problems, and so that is an amazing asset. One of the potential challenges to overcome is that you also have processes, and you've mitigated risk in having those processes deliver value to your populations. And as the world changes, as funder mentalities change, it can be very, very difficult for us to adapt and change. And so that's why I say you might want to think about a number of these innovators as your partners, who can help to infect your people within your organization with an excitement for coming at problems in new ways. And think of that as a way of overcoming what is a typical, Clay Christensen calls it the innovator's dilemma. You are all innovators. You all have built amazing innovation engines, but once you start delivering your value in a certain way and doing things specifically over and over again to be able to have, both deliver on trust and to have reliability, those also can become attacks on innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and if you take the example of NetHope, and what it's doing is aggregating knowledge across a whole bunch of somewhat separate organizations. But if you thought about yourselves individually as organizations like NetHope do, and think about yourselves as a network, because we're actually all part of a network, it's just some of them are configured in different ways. And I think some of the USPs for not-for-profits are, we talk about meaning, but actually this issue of meaning and younger people wanting to have an impact can't be kind of said too loudly. That's really something that corporate organizations are struggling with. And I had a very impactful conversation from somebody who's joined Team Rubicon from a very different field. So that is a huge thing. I think this gets into values, also that you can have an impact, but also the focus on human beings. Mm-hmm. Because what I think is we're going to enter what I think of as a hyper-digital and hyper-physical future. So I think we talk a lot about the acceleration of the digital, but I think what we're seeing is also an acceleration of the physical. So if you look at, particularly amongst younger people, there's a lot of meetups now happening physically in person that have started online. it's a bit of a kind of left field mention, but sofa sounds, which is gigs that happen in people's homes. So you know, somebody will produce a gig in their home, and I went to one in Brooklyn. I was the oldest person there by about 30 years, but it was amazing. People get, it's an economy around it, and so I think the emphasis on the human aspect. Don't think that your future is going to be all digitized. That got referenced, I think, in one of the talks this morning. It's actually going to be a very human-centered future, enabled and supported through dramatically improved technology.
Yeah. So one thing that, just building also on the discussion around lifelong learning and around barriers, but that could be an advantage for the NGOs, and again, speaking from the perspective of some of the populations we're serving, is one of the barriers that we're seeing is the connection between learning and earning. Because of the fragmentation and silos that exist between our system, our education system does not take the signals from the employment system, and the employment system doesn't always signal in time what jobs are available. We, as an NGO sector, as a humanitarian sector, also at the same time have access to the future talent base. And we're talking about millions and hundreds of millions of people. I just talked about MENA region that has the highest population of the young people that the world has ever seen. Just recently, McKinsey published there are 75 million people between the ages of 15 and 24 that are out of job, and not just in the Middle East or North Africa, but also youth unemployment in Spain is at 33%. So that is to say, there's a barrier that through our programming we can remove by connecting learning to earning and taking the signals of the economic opportunities that are diverse and not your traditional full-time job. It could be project-based work, remote work, it could be impact sourcing, it could be entrepreneurship, and building learning components and to align with that, and that to get young people closer to those jobs. It's a real opportunity for us, and we sit in the middle of the signals and the population that is the future talent.
And to pick up Gary's point, it's a market problem, because you've got a lot of human resource without the skills necessarily, and you go then a whole bunch of places where there's a shortage.
That's right.
And so you've got these crazy things going on.
40% actually of the US employers just recently said that they couldn't fill the positions because there are either workers that have absolutely no skills to match those jobs or underskilled.
Yeah, and without, I know you want to finish, but that's where government has a key role and is inadequately serving that, because then you need to enable that to happen.
Yep.
Well, it's all very convenient when we can end by saying that we're the answer to our own problem. So thank you very much for joining me. They'll be up for questions, and I think it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
Yay! Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much to everyone, and the panelists and Diana. It's lunch. Go and enjoy your lunch, and make sure you're at your breakout sessions at 1 o'clock. And we'll be back here for some closing remarks at 5:15.